Sorry. Active cat. So, Herman Melville concludes the 55th chapter of Moby-Dick, called Of the Monstrous Pictures of Whales, in the following way. Any way you may look at it, you must needs conclude that the great Leviathan is that one creature in the world which must remain unpainted to the last. True, one portrait may hit the mark much nearer than another, but none can hit it with any very considerable degree of exactness. So there is no earthly way of finding out precisely what the whale really looks like. And the only mode in which you can derive even a tolerable idea of his living contour is by going whaling yourself. But by so doing, you run no small risk of being eternally stove and sunk by him. Wherefore, it seems to me you had best not be too fastidious in your curiosity touching this Leviathan. Now, this is one of many such passages in the novel where Melville, via his narrator Ishmael, claims that the whale as a species, but the sperm whale in particular, is beyond representation. That no painting captures the sperm whale accurately, no written description captures the sperm whale accurately, no visible representation can render the reality of the sperm whale. Sometimes Ishmael goes so far as to say the very skin of the sperm whale is like an enigma. He likens it to a riddle. He likens it to hieroglyphs. He basically concludes that the sperm whale is an ineffable mystery. It is inscrutable. Now, this inscrutability is what someone like Ahab hates. He says, as he's trying to convince the crew in the quarterdeck speech to follow him in his fiery hunt for Moby-Dick, he says that he doesn't know what drove the whale to take his leg off. He says the whale, like all visible objects, is like a pasteboard mask. What's behind the mask? Shove your lance through to find out. It may be nothing. It may be pure malignancy. Is the whale a principle of evil? Is the whale an agent carrying out the will of some other evil principle? He does not know. And the inscrutability, he says, is what fills him with fury. Ishmael, as I say on the other hand, is very comfortable with the inscrutability of the sperm whale, articulating it many times. In the passage I read, he's saying that the whale can never be painted. But, and this is the key point that I want to develop here, some portraits of the whale hit the mark nearer than others. Now, on the surface, this is just a literal statement that says, if I'm out at sea and I stare at a whale with my two eyes, and maybe I'm a good painter, I'm more likely to capture the physicality of the whale accurately than someone who does not see the whale with two eyes and cannot paint. But Ishmael's saying something deeper. He's saying that epistemologically, the whale is beyond our knowing. No matter how hard we try to know the essence of the whale, the sperm whale in particular, even more particularly Moby-Dick, no matter how hard we try to know the essence of the sperm whale, we will never know it fully. However, some efforts to know the whale get closer than others. Put another way, all of our accounts of whales are interpretations, none fully adequate. Put another way, all of our efforts to render the facticity of the whale, physically, spiritually, are fictions. By extension, our accounts of the world are interpretations. Our accounts of the world are fictions. The world itself is too mysterious. The world itself is too inscrutable, whether it be the whale or the ocean, the cosmos, the planet, one person, like Ahab, who's often likened to a sphinx or a pyramid. Any effort to represent the world will fail. All of our abilities, all of our efforts to render the world factually are really fictions. So the novel implies that we live in fictions, but some fictions are more factual than others. This is the paradox I'm developing here. If no portrait of the whale is ultimately true, some get nearer than others to the truth. The same can be said of anything that we interpret. Now, interestingly, Melville highlights the fictionality of the novel Moby-Dick on several occasions, as if to highlight the fact that this is only one way of an infinite number of ways of describing the experience of whaling. He highlights that this novel is something constructed, something made, and ultimately something constructed, something made that is inadequate to the task. That it, like a portrait of the whale, like all portraits of the whale, is ultimately inadequate. Here's some ways that Melville highlights the fictionality of the novel. He begins the narrative famously via Ishmael with the sentence, "Call me Ishmael." Well, this is an odd way to introduce a novel's narrator. If I come up to you and I say, "Call me X," the assumption is that that's not my real name. So it appears that Ishmael is a made-up name for our narrator. So we don't really know who the narrator is. And then we wonder, why is he giving us a made-up name? Does he have something to hide? Is he trying to deceive us? And then we further think, well, what is his made-up name? Ishmael. It comes from the Bible. Ishmael is cast out in the desert with his mother Hagar by Abraham and Sarah. It'd be like saying, "Call me Hamlet," or "Call me Jesus," "Call me Ishmael." So not only is there a sense of who is this guy, but there's a sense that he's going to impersonate a mythological figure, which comes ready-made with the baggage of meaning, which further obfuscates our sense of who this particular person is. Another way that fictionality is highlighted, the character Bulkington. Early in the novel, Ishmael sees Bulkington come straight off of a ship. He's been away for many years on a whaling vessel, and he comes into a tavern full with all of his other sailors, and Ishmael notices him. He's very handsome, and he says, "Well, what a wonderful specimen of a man. It looks like he's ready to go out into the sea again." And then right when the Pequod takes off, he says, "Oh, there's Bulkington amongst the crew." But then we never hear of Bulkington again. It's as if Melville starts the novel out thinking Bulkington's going to be a main character, but then decides, nah, I don't want Bulkington to be a main character. In fact, I don't really care if he's a character or not. But instead of cutting him out, I'm just going to leave him there. Now, there are reasons for this that we could go into. Basically, I'll be brief. Melville didn't imagine Ahab when he first began writing the novel. As he was writing the novel, he started thinking about Ahab, and Ahab takes over the narrative. And when that happens, a character like Bulkington just goes away. But again, there's a sense that this is a story, and I'm going to leave in the stuff that normally writers take out. So the story Moby-Dick is also about the making of the story Moby-Dick, highlighting again the fictionality, the artificiality. Ishmael, as narrator, sometimes talks to us about things that are going to happen in the plot or in the future. He gives away spoilers, we might say. He says, "Oh, I really like my friend Queequeg, and I'm really sad to think about his last long dive." Already prophesying that Queequeg will die. Of course, Queequeg does die. But a traditional feature of a novel is to withhold information to build suspense. But here, Ishmael gives away a spoiler to kind of kill the suspense. And again, to say, look, this is a novel. I'm not trying to create anything real here. And it's a novel that's not necessarily that well written. Not only have I dropped a character without any explanation, but now I'm telling you what's going to happen to another character that you're really attached to. Right. Another way the fictionality of the book is captured is that Ishmael is constantly describing events that there's no way he could see. Early on, he describes what goes on in the captain's cabin at mealtime, goes into great detail. But there's no way he could stare into the captain's cabin for long enough to describe that event in great detail. On many occasions, he's going to describe soliloquies, especially of Ahab, that he simply could not overhear unless he were standing like right beside of the character. So again, he's highlighting that this is a fiction. I am a first-person narrator, but I'm making stuff up, right? And finally, not finally, but yet another example occurs in the famous doubloon chapter, where various characters look at the golden doubloon that Ahab nailed to the masthead, saying that the first person who sees Moby-Dick will get the golden doubloon. And in this chapter, several characters look at the doubloon and describe the doubloon in such a way that reflects their own egos. Ahab looks at the doubloon, and there's a mountain on it and a sun on it. He goes, the mountain, that's Ahab. The sun, that's Ahab. Stubb describes it based on his personality. Starbuck does as well. And meanwhile, Pip stands to the sides, conjugating the verb to look. I look, you look, he looks, she looks. The suggestion is that each of these characters is not seeing a real doubloon, but seeing their construction of the doubloon, meaning they're not finding a doubloon, they're making a doubloon. So each is constrained by a fiction of his own making. Each is seeing the world through a filter of a construction of self, a fiction. So then, what do we say of these two ideas I have in play here? One, that Melville implies that any interpretation of the world is inadequate to the world because the world is too inscrutable. So all interpretations, to some extent, are fictions because they do not capture total facticity. But some fictions, some portraits, some representations, some portraits, maybe I just said that, come closer to the inscrutable than others. That's the idea that appears in the last paragraph of chapter 55. I'm extrapolating a bit from it. That paragraph focuses only on the whale. I'm expanding the idea. And then how Melville uses several techniques to highlight the fictionality of his novel. Basically saying this is but an interpretation, this is but a fiction. So, in highlighting the fictionality of his work, Melville is channeling a very important idea that arose in Germany in the late 18th century, 1798, when the Schlegel brothers, August and Friedrich Schlegel, and their colleague Frederick von Hardenberg, who went by the nickname Novalis, came up with this notion of irony they called romantic irony. And romantic irony differs from the other kinds of irony you might be familiar with, like verbal irony or dramatic irony or circumstantial irony or Socratic irony. Romantic irony is based on this idea that there is a constant gap between word and world. That again, the world is too plentiful in meaning for us ever to capture it. It's too superabundant in significance for us ever to capture it. It's irreducibly inscrutable. The romantic ironist does not despair over this, but sees this ineffability as an invitation endlessly to interpret, endlessly to attempt to describe something that can't be described. It's generative, this gap between word and world. And powerful works of art express this romantically ironic view by highlighting their artifice, highlighting their fictionality. One primary way this occurs is through the self-conscious narrator, who while telling the story is telling us he's telling the story. Ishmael, of course, does this all the time. Lord Byron does this in Don Juan all the time. We see it in films or TV shows when a character turns to the camera and starts talking, highlighting the fact that this is not an effort to depict reality. This is but a construct. So Melville is channeling this idea of romantic irony, and he's practicing the techniques of the romantic ironist and highlighting the fictionality of his own novel. Ultimately, the Schlegel brothers and Novalis, Melville would probably say that those works that come nearest to the inscrutability of the cosmos are romantically ironic works. Works that, in highlighting their own inadequacy, point us in rich and interesting and unexpected ways to the reality that they are inadequate toward. So all the contradictions in Moby-Dick, all the paradoxes in Moby-Dick, all the digressions in Moby-Dick, all the ironies in Moby-Dick, all of the meta moments in Moby-Dick suggest a kind of linguistic fecundity, a linguistic wildness, if you will. Melville says if you're going to write a book about a whale, you need a condor's feather for your quill and Vesuvius for your inkwell. The wildness, the bigness, the unruliness of Moby-Dick probably point us more forcefully to the wildness, the unruliness, the hugeness of the world that our words are incapable of rendering.